the jungle stopped burning. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, the world held its breath. Then the trees exploded. Private First Class Tanaka crouched in his reinforced bunker on Okinawa, fingers pressed against concrete that suddenly felt too thin. Through the firing slit, he watched American Sherman tanks positioning themselves at the forest edge. Behind them, infantry in unfamiliar formation. Something was different about this attack. The first plane appeared low over the canopy, too low. Dangerously low. Silver canisters tumbled from its belly, end over end, catching sunlight as they fell. They looked almost graceful, almost harmless. The canisters disappeared into the mahogany trees, 100 meters away. Trees that had sheltered Japanese positions for months. Trees thick enough to stop rifle fire. Trees that created an impenetrable defensive network. The explosion wasn't loud. It was a soft whump, like a giant exhaling. Then the forest became liquid fire. Orange flames rolled through the canopy like water flowing uphill. The mahogany trees, each trunk wider than a man, began burning from the inside. Bark blackened and cracked. Leaves vaporized into ash before they could fall. The fire clung to everything it touched, spreading with impossible speed, flowing like a living thing that consumed oxygen, faster than lungs could breathe it. Tanaka watched soldiers in distant bunkers emerge from their positions, uniforms aflame, unable to stop burning. He didn't know what the Americans had dropped, but in that moment, watching the forest erase itself, he understood that something fundamental had changed in warfare. The fire had a name, napalm. Valentine's Day, 1942. Louis Frederick Fieser stood in the basement laboratory of Harvard's Converse Chemistry Building, stirring a mixture that would kill more people than any chemical weapon of the 20th century. Outside, Boston shivered through wartime winter. Inside the lab, Fieser combined aluminum salts with gasoline, watching the liquid transform into something that shouldn't exist. A gel that could burn underwater, stick to human skin, and generate temperatures hot enough to melt steel. He called it napalm. The name came from its chemical components, naphthenic and palmitic acids. The mixture was brown, thick, and deceptively innocuous looking. Mixed with gasoline at room temperature, it created a substance that was 6 times more effective than thermite, burned between 1,470 and 2,190 degrees Fahrenheit, and most importantly, clung to whatever it touched until every molecule of fuel had been consumed. Fieser was 39 years old. He had already synthesized vitamin K, revolutionized quinone chemistry, and established himself as one of America's preeminent organic chemists. His textbooks were used in universities worldwide. His research on blood-clotting agents had saved countless lives. Now, he was perfecting the science of burning people alive. The project had begun 2 years earlier. In 1940, Japan had conquered Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Thailand, controlling 90% of the world's natural rubber production. American military flamethrowers required rubber to create the gel that made gasoline stick to targets. Without rubber, gasoline burned too quickly, dripping off surfaces before causing significant damage. Soldiers operating flamethrowers in combat found their weapons largely ineffective. The National Defense Research Committee assigned Fieser to solve this problem. His task: create a synthetic thickening agent that could replace rubber, something cheap to manufacture, stable at extreme temperatures, easy to transport, and devastatingly effective when ignited. Fieser assembled a 6-man team in the basement laboratory. For security reasons, the project was designated Anonymous Research Project No. 4. Even Fieser's wife Mary, who had co-authored 36 research papers with him, was kept in the dark about his work for months. She only discovered the truth when she met Major Rambaut at the airport, and he casually asked, "How is your husband's incendiary project progressing?" The team experimented with hundreds of chemical combinations. They needed something that would gel gasoline into a substance thick enough to stick to vertical surfaces, but fluid enough to spray from nozzles. It had to remain stable in sub-zero temperatures and tropical heat. It had to ignite reliably, and it had to burn with sufficient intensity to destroy reinforced structures. On February 14, 1942, Fieser achieved the correct formula. The aluminum soap powder, when mixed with gasoline, created a gel with remarkable properties. It was stable across temperature ranges from -60 to +120 degrees Fahrenheit. It could be stored indefinitely, without degrading. Most critically, When ignited, it burned with an intensity that exceeded anything previously developed. Fieser's laboratory notes describe the substance clinically: a brown, dry powder that is not sticky by itself, but when mixed with gasoline, turns into an extremely sticky and flammable substance. What the notes don't convey is how napalm burns. Regular gasoline combusts quickly, releasing energy rapidly and burning out within seconds. Napalm combustion is sustained, controlled, and complete. The gel structure ensures that fuel remains in contact with the target throughout the entire burning process. As the outer layer burns away, fresh gel underneath continues burning. The process continues until every molecule of fuel has been consumed. This means napalm doesn't burn, it incinerates, completely, absolutely, with a thoroughness that leaves nothing but ash and heat-fractured concrete. Valentine's Day, 1942, Louis Frederick Fieser stood in the basement laboratory of Harvard's Converse Chemistry Building, stirring a mixture that would kill more people than any chemical weapon of the 20th century. Outside, Boston shivered through wartime winter. Inside the lab, Fieser combined aluminum salts with gasoline, watching the liquid transform into something that shouldn't exist: a gel that could burn underwater, stick to human skin, and generate temperatures hot enough to melt steel. He called it napalm. The name came from its chemical components, naphthenic and palmitic acids. The mixture was brown, thick, and deceptively innocuous looking. Mixed with gasoline at room temperature, it created a substance that was 6 times more effective than thermite, burned between 1,470 and 2,190 degrees Fahrenheit, and most importantly, clung to whatever it touched until every molecule of fuel had been consumed. Fieser was 39 years old. He had already synthesized vitamin K, revolutionized quinone chemistry, and established himself as one of America's preeminent organic chemists. His textbooks were used in universities worldwide. His research on blood-clotting agents had saved countless lives. Now, he was perfecting the science of burning people alive. The project had begun 2 years earlier. In 1940, Japan had conquered Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Thailand, controlling 90% of the world's natural rubber production. American military flamethrowers required rubber to create the gel that made gasoline stick to targets. Without rubber, gasoline burned too quickly, dripping off surfaces before causing significant damage. Soldiers operating flamethrowers in combat found their weapons largely ineffective. The National Defense Research Committee assigned Fieser to solve this problem. His task: create a synthetic thickening agent that could replace rubber, something cheap to manufacture, stable at extreme temperatures, easy to transport, and devastatingly effective when ignited. Fieser assembled a 6-man team in the basement laboratory. For security reasons, the project was designated Anonymous Research Project No. 4. Even Fieser's wife Mary, who had co-authored 36 research papers with him, was kept in the dark about his work for months. She only discovered the truth when she met Major Rambaut at the airport, and he casually asked, "How is your husband's incendiary project progressing?" The team experimented with hundreds of chemical combinations. They needed something that would gel gasoline into a substance thick enough to stick to vertical surfaces, but fluid enough to spray from nozzles. It had to remain stable in sub-zero temperatures and tropical heat. It had to ignite reliably, and it had to burn with sufficient intensity to destroy reinforced structures. On February 14, 1942, Fieser achieved the correct formula. The aluminum soap powder, when mixed with gasoline, created a gel with remarkable properties. It was stable across temperature ranges from -60 to +120 degrees Fahrenheit. It could be stored indefinitely, without degrading. Most critically, when ignited, it burned with an intensity that exceeded anything previously developed. Fieser's laboratory notes describe the substance clinically: a brown, dry powder that is not sticky by itself, but when mixed with gasoline, turns into an extremely sticky and flammable substance. What the notes don't convey is how napalm burns. Regular gasoline combusts quickly, releasing energy rapidly and burning out within seconds. Napalm combustion is sustained, controlled, and complete. The gel structure ensures that fuel remains in contact with the target throughout the entire burning process. As the outer layer burns away, fresh gel underneath continues burning. The process continues until every molecule of fuel has been consumed. This means napalm doesn't burn, it incinerates, completely, absolutely, with a thoroughness that leaves nothing but ash and heat-fractured concrete. First blood in the jungle. December 15, 1943, Papua New Guinea. American soldiers crouched in thick jungle vegetation, facing a Japanese defensive position that had resisted conventional attacks for 3 days. The bunker was constructed from logs and earth, covered with vegetation, nearly invisible until you were close enough to die from its machine gun fire. Sergeant William Morrison carried the new M2 flamethrower, a backpack system weighing 68 pounds when full. Earlier flamethrowers had used gasoline. This one used napalm. Morrison had been told it was more effective. He was about to discover how much more. Morrison approached to within 30 yards of the bunker. Japanese defenders couldn't see him through the jungle foliage. He triggered the flamethrower. A jet of burning napalm shot forward 70 feet, splashing across the bunker's log walls and flowing into the firing slits. The effect was immediate and total. Screams erupted from inside the bunker. Smoke poured from every opening. The logs themselves began burning, not surface burning, but deep combustion that turned solid wood into charcoal. Within 2 minutes, the screaming stopped. Within 5 minutes, the bunker's structure collapsed inward, consumed by fire so intense that it created its own wind, sucking oxygen into the flames and expelling superheated carbon monoxide. Morrison's after-action report was clinical. New fuel mixture, highly effective against fortified positions. Target neutralized completely. That single engagement in Papua New Guinea demonstrated napalm's tactical value in Pacific jungle warfare. Japanese defensive doctrine relied on creating virtually invisible, fortified positions deep in jungle terrain. Concrete bunkers and log pillboxes, covered with vegetation and connected by underground tunnels, created defensive networks that conventional weapons struggled to destroy. Artillery could be aimed at a bunker, but if the shells missed by even a few feet, the fortified positions survived. Grenades had to be thrown directly into firing slits, a nearly impossible task under machine gun fire. Direct assault meant advancing across open ground into concentrated defensive fire. American casualties in these attacks were catastrophic. Napalm changed the calculation entirely. Flamethrower operators could spray burning gel from relatively safe distances. The gel flowed into bunkers through firing slits, ventilation openings, and gaps in defensive structures. Once inside, napalm didn't just burn it, consumed all available oxygen, creating carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide that suffocated defenders, even if they avoided the flames. Most importantly, bunkers cleared, with napalm stayed cleared. Japanese defensive tactics often involved abandoning bunkers temporarily during artillery barrages, then reoccupying them through underground tunnels after the shelling stopped. Napalm made this impossible. The gel continued burning long after the initial attack. Bunkers that had been napalmed remained lethally hot for hours, often days. Their interiors were transformed into ovens that made reoccupation suicidal. Word spread quickly through American Pacific commands. Napalm worked. Request more napalm. Send napalm immediately. By early 1944, napalm was being deployed across the Pacific theater. Flamethrower units became specialized infantry, attached to assault battalions. These soldiers received intensive training on operating the M2 flamethrower system, approaching defensive positions under fire, and delivering napalm with maximum effectiveness. The work was extraordinarily dangerous. Flamethrower operators were priority targets for Japanese defenders. A single rifle bullet, puncturing a napalm tank, could ignite the operator instantly. Statistics from Pacific Island campaigns show that flamethrower operators sustained casualty rates exceeding 90%, but their effectiveness was undeniable. After-action reports repeatedly describe situations where conventional infantry assaults failed, then succeeded immediately. Once flamethrower units arrived, fortified positions that had resisted for days fell within hours. Defensive networks that seemed impregnable collapsed under napalm attacks. The Japanese defenders called flamethrowers American flame devils. They feared these weapons more than artillery, more than tanks, more than naval bombardment. Napalm represented something beyond conventional military violence. It was fire that couldn't be stopped, that flowed like water but burned like hell itself, that killed through heat and suffocation and sheer overwhelming terror. Tinian, the dress rehearsal. July 24, 1944. Tinian Island, Northern Marianas. From the cockpit of his B-29 Superfortress, Captain James McCarthy watched his bombardier release the first napalm bombs ever dropped from strategic bombers. 4 500-pound napalm canisters tumbled from the bomb bay, arcing toward the jungle below. The explosions bloomed orange and black. Fire spread through the canopy like liquid flowing downhill. Within seconds, an area measuring 500 yards across was burning. Within minutes, the fire had consumed everything flammable and was beginning to create its own weather system. Superheated air rising rapidly, drawing in oxygen from surrounding areas, creating winds that spread the fire even further. McCarthy had dropped conventional high-explosive bombs many times. This was different. HE bombs cratered the earth, destroyed structures through blast overpressure, and killed through fragmentation. Their effects were immediate but limited in area. Napalm bombs didn't crater or fragment. They created environments where nothing could survive. The fire consumed oxygen faster than humans could breathe it. Temperatures rose high enough to ignite materials that wouldn't normally burn: metal, concrete, earth itself. Carbon monoxide concentrations reached lethal levels within seconds. Most horrifying was how the fire moved. It didn't spread randomly. It actively sought fuel, flowing through vegetation like an intelligent predator, finding every combustible surface, every pocket of oxygen, every living thing. Tinian was the proving ground for strategic napalm bombing. The island's geography, dense jungle, covering limestone caves and coral ridges, matched terrain the Allies would face on larger islands as they pushed toward Japan. Japanese defenders had fortified Tinian with the same defensive doctrine they employed everywhere: deep bunkers, interconnected tunnels, artillery hidden in caves, and infantry positions camouflaged so effectively that American scouts could walk past them without noticing. Conventional bombing had proven ineffective against these defenses. High-explosive bombs needed direct hits to destroy bunkers. The thick jungle canopy made precision bombing nearly impossible. Japanese positions survived even intensive bombardment campaigns. Napalm eliminated these problems. Precision wasn't necessary. A napalm bomb could miss its target by 100 feet and still accomplish its mission. The spreading fire found defensive positions that bombardiers couldn't see. The oxygen depletion killed defenders in sealed bunkers that blast weapons couldn't penetrate. After Tinian, American air commanders understood they had discovered a new kind of strategic weapon. Napalm didn't destroy enemy capabilities through precision strikes against specific targets. It destroyed enemy capabilities by making entire areas uninhabitable. Iwo Jima, the meat grinder. February 19, 1945. Lieutenant Takashi Ishikawa crouched in a concrete bunker deep inside Iwo Jima's volcanic rock. He had been told this position was impregnable. The bunker was covered by 15 feet of volcanic stone. Its walls were reinforced concrete 3 feet thick. The entrance was protected by multiple layers of defensive positions. American shells had been falling for 3 days straight, and the bunker hadn't received a scratch. Then, the flamethrower tank appeared. The M4 Sherman tank had been modified with a flamethrower system mounted where the main gun normally sat. The tank approached Ishikawa's bunker slowly, deliberately. Infantry followed behind it, using the tank as a mobile shield. When the tank reached optimal range, approximately 100 yards, it stopped. A jet of fire erupted from the tank's projector. The gel flooded the defensive positions, the corridors, the interior chambers. Everything began burning simultaneously. Ishikawa and his men scrambled deeper into the bunker, fleeing the advancing fire. They sealed themselves in the deepest chamber, closing steel doors behind them. The doors held against the flames. For a moment, they thought they were safe. Then, the oxygen ran out. Napalm, burning in the outer chambers, consumed all available air. Carbon monoxide filled the tunnels. The sealed room became an oven, not from flames, but from conducted heat through the concrete walls. Temperature inside the chamber rose past 100 degrees, then 150, then 200. Ishikawa's men suffocated long before they burned. Their bodies were found weeks later, intact except for heat damage to exposed skin, killed by the invisible effects of napalm rather than its visible flames. This was the reality of fighting on Iwo Jima. The island was 8 square miles of volcanic rock, honeycombed with 11 miles of tunnels. Japanese commander Tadamichi Kuribayashi had fortified every square foot. His orders to the 21,000 defenders were explicit. No banzai charges, no wasted attacks, no dying for honor. Every man would fight from prepared positions, inflict maximum casualties on the Americans, and die only when their position became absolutely untenable. The defensive network was brilliant. Bunkers with fields of fire covering every beach approach. Artillery positions hidden in caves with reinforced steel doors. Mortar teams positioned on reverse slopes where American naval gunfire couldn't reach them. Underground hospitals, ammunition depots, command centers, all interconnected by tunnels that allowed Japanese forces to move unseen, reinforcing threatened positions and evacuating units before they could be destroyed. American pre-invasion bombardment, 3 days of continuous naval gunfire from battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, plus aerial bombing, appeared to accomplish nothing. The Marines landing on February 19th expected weakened defenses. Instead, they encountered the most sophisticated defensive network they had ever faced. The battle became a nightmare. Conventional weapons were nearly useless against the tunnel system. Artillery shells cratered the surface, but left the underground network intact. Small arms fire was ineffective against reinforced bunkers. Even tank main guns couldn't penetrate some defensive positions. Napalm became the primary weapon for reducing Japanese fortifications. Flamethrower infantry advanced slowly across the island, methodically burning out each bunker, each pillbox, each cave entrance. The work was exhausting, terrifying, and absolutely necessary. Without napalm, the battle might have been unwinnable. Portable M2 flamethrowers proved effective, but resulted in catastrophic casualties among operators. By the second week of fighting, flamethrower units had sustained casualty rates exceeding 92%. Trained operators were dead, wounded, or psychologically incapable of continuing. The solution was flamethrower tanks. The Marines had only 4 flame tanks per tank battalion, but they became the most requested support weapon on the island. Infantry units would halt their advance and wait for a flame tank rather than attempt to clear bunkers with conventional weapons. The flame tanks proved devastatingly effective. Each tank carried approximately 490 gallons of napalm, with a range exceeding 100 yards. Tank armor protected the crew from small arms fire. The psychological impact on Japanese defenders was overwhelming. Watching a flame tank approach meant certain death, either from fire or suffocation. By late February, Marine tank battalions were expending between 5,000 and 10,000 gallons of napalm per day. The entire island reeked of burning fuel, scorched rock, and roasted flesh. Volcanic dust, mixed with napalm residue, created a black, oily soot that covered everything: men, weapons, equipment. The battle lasted 36 days. American casualties totaled 26,000, including 6,800 dead. Japanese casualties were approximately 21,000 dead. Only 216 Japanese soldiers were captured, most because they had been knocked unconscious or were too wounded to commit suicide. Iwo Jima demonstrated both napalm's effectiveness and its horror. The weapon worked precisely as designed, enabling American forces to defeat an enemy holding nearly impregnable defensive positions. But the cost measured in burned bodies, suffocated defenders, and Marines, who would never forget the smell of burning human flesh, raised questions that wouldn't be answered for decades. Typhoon of Steel. April 1st, 1945. The invasion of Okinawa began with the largest amphibious assault in Pacific War history. 182,000 American troops landed on beaches, defended by 100,000 Japanese soldiers and conscripted Okinawan civilians. The island was critical, only 340 miles from Japan's home islands, close enough to serve as a staging base for the planned invasion of Japan itself. Japanese commander Mitsuru Ushijima had learned from previous island battles. Defending beaches was suicide. American naval gunfire and close air support destroyed beach defenses before infantry even landed. Instead, Ushijima withdrew his forces to the island's southern third, creating a defensive line anchored on ridges, hills, and escarpments. The resulting battle became the longest sustained campaign in the Pacific theater. 82 days of continuous combat. The Japanese called it Tetsu no Bofu, the Typhoon of Steel. The name referred to the intensity of American firepower. Naval guns, artillery, aerial bombing, and close air support delivered in quantities never before seen in warfare. Napalm played a central role. On April 19th, the American 10th Army launched an offensive supported by the largest artillery barrage in Pacific history, 324 guns firing. Following the artillery came aerial attacks. 650 Navy and Marine aircraft attacked Japanese positions with napalm bombs, rockets, and machine gun fire. The napalm strikes created scenes that witnesses struggled to describe. Entire ridgelines erupted in flame. Vegetation vanished in seconds. Earth itself burned where napalm gel adhered to volcanic soil. The fires were so intense, they created wind patterns that affected aircraft flying overhead. But Japanese defensive positions were sited on reverse slopes, the backs of ridges and hills, protected from direct fire. Defenders waited out the bombardment in caves and tunnels, then emerged once the barrage ended to rain mortar, fire, and grenades on advancing American infantry. The solution was direct assault with flamethrowers and demolitions. Small unit actions, squad-sized or smaller, advancing under covering fire to reach bunker entrances. Flamethrower operators would dash forward, spray napalm into openings, then fall back while the structure burned. Demolition teams would seal cave entrances with explosives, entombing defenders inside. This tactic worked, but was murderously slow and expensive in casualties. Progress was measured in yards per day. Individual ridges required weeks to capture. Every bunker, every cave, every defensive position had to be reduced individually. Private Eugene Sledge, fighting with the 1st Marine Division, described the horror. The battlefield reeked with the stench of death. Swarms of flies covered everything. We lived in mud and filth beyond description. But the worst was the smell of burning flesh when napalm hit enemy positions. That smell stayed with you, in your clothes, your hair, your memory. Some men vomited when they smelled it. Others became numb to it. Nobody ever forgot it. By May, Marine units were dependent on flame tanks to make any progress. The tanks would methodically burn out defensive positions, while infantry provided security. The work was grinding, repetitious, psychologically devastating. Men, who had survived multiple island campaigns, broke down under the sustained horror of Okinawa's close-quarters combat. The final phase of the battle saw napalm employed on an unprecedented scale. Army Air Force's B-29 bombers dropped napalm loads on remaining Japanese positions in southern Okinawa. The bombing created firestorms that consumed entire hillsides. Japanese defenders emerged from caves, with their uniforms burning, unable to extinguish fires that clung to skin and cloth. The battle officially ended on June 22nd. American casualties totaled more than 12,000 dead and 36,000 wounded. Japanese casualties exceeded 100,000 dead, including thousands of Okinawan civilians caught in the fighting. The island's terrain was so thoroughly devastated that pilots flying overhead described it as looking like the surface of the moon cratered, burned, devoid of vegetation, dotted with destroyed fortifications. Okinawa proved that napalm could enable victory against the most determined defensive efforts. It also demonstrated the weapon's escalating horror. Casualties among flamethrower operators approached 100%. Entire battalions were rotated off the line, suffering from combat fatigue. Medical personnel, treating napalm burns, developed psychological trauma from witnessing injuries they couldn't effectively treat. The question haunting American commanders was simple but terrible. If Okinawa cost 50,000 casualties, what would invading Japan itself cost? How many more islands would need to be burned? How many more men would operate flamethrowers until they were killed? How much more napalm would be required? The answer came not from infantry flamethrowers, but from strategic bombing. Tokyo, Operation Meeting House. March 9, 1945, 2300 hours. Major General Curtis LeMay stood in the operations center at Guam, studying weather reports and finalized attack plans. What he was about to order would kill more people in a single night than any military operation in history to that point. He knew this. He had calculated it. He had decided it was necessary. LeMay commanded the 21st Bomber Command, responsible for strategic bombing of Japan. His B-29 Superfortress bombers had been conducting high-altitude precision bombing raids for months with disappointing results. Japanese industrial targets were difficult to hit from high altitude. Cloud cover obscured targets. High winds at altitude affected bomb accuracy. Fighter opposition was intense, losses were significant, and results were minimal. LeMay had concluded that precision bombing wouldn't win the war. What would win the war was destroying Japan's ability to manufacture military supplies, and that manufacturing happened in thousands of small workshops dispersed throughout residential neighborhoods. If you wanted to destroy Japanese industrial capacity, you had to burn the cities. The plan for March 9th was radical. B-29s would attack at night from low altitude, 5,000 to 7,000 feet, instead of the usual 25,000. This reduced fuel consumption, allowed heavier bomb loads, and made bombing more accurate. The low altitude also made bombers more vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire, but LeMay gambled that Japanese defenses couldn't react effectively to a nighttime low-altitude attack. The target was Tokyo's Shitamachi Ward, a densely populated working-class district near the docks. Intelligence estimates indicated approximately 1 million people lived in the target area. The attack plan called for 334 B-29s, carrying 1,665 tons of bombs, almost entirely M69, incendiary cluster bombs filled with napalm. The first wave of bombers would drop bombs in a massive X pattern centered on the district. Follow-on aircraft would simply aim for the flaming X. The goal was to create a firestorm, a conflagration so intense it generated its own weather system, sucking oxygen into the fire and creating hurricane-force winds that spread flames throughout the target area. At midnight, the first B-29s reached Tokyo and began their bombing runs. Yoko Fujimoto woke to the sound of air raid sirens. She was 34 years old, lived in a wooden house with her husband and 3 children in Shitamachi. Air raids had become routine. American bombers attacked regularly, but casualties were usually limited. The family had a shelter dug beneath their house. They had practiced evacuation procedures. Yoko wasn't particularly worried, as she gathered her children and prepared to move to the shelter. Then the incendiary bombs began falling. The M69s were cluster weapons. Each bomb contained 38 napalm-filled bomblets, designed to scatter over a wide area. When they hit rooftops, the bomblets punched through thin wooden shingles and lodged in ceiling beams. 3 to 5 seconds later, they ignited and regurgitated a jet of flaming napalm that sprayed across interior spaces. Yoko's house was hit by 3 incendiary bomblets within the first 10 minutes of the raid. The first punched through her roof and ignited in the attic. The second landed in the street outside, igniting neighboring houses. The third hit the house behind hers, starting a fire that quickly spread. Within 15 minutes, her entire neighborhood was burning. Yoko and her family fled their house, joining hundreds of others running through smoke-filled streets. The fires were spreading faster than people could run. Flames jumped from building to building, carried by winds that were intensifying as the firestorm developed. The temperature in the target area began rising catastrophically. In normal fires, hot air rises, and cooler air flows in from the sides. In a firestorm, the updraft becomes so powerful that it creates winds exceeding hurricane strength. These winds flow toward the fire from all directions, carrying sparks, burning debris, and superheated gases. Yoko ran toward the Sumida River, hoping to find safety near water. Thousands of others had the same idea. The riverbanks were packed with people trying to escape the flames. Many jumped into the water, many drowned. Those who stayed on the banks were engulfed when the firestorm reached the river. The heat became unbearable, not just from flames, but from radiated heat that ignited clothing and hair from dozens of feet away. People's bodies began burning before the fire even touched them. Skin blistered and split. Clothing ignited spontaneously. The air itself became lethal, superheated, to temperatures that seared lungs with every breath. Yoko lost track of her children in the chaos. She lost consciousness at some point, overcome by smoke and heat. She woke hours later in a burned area, surrounded by bodies. Her clothes were mostly burned away. Her skin was severely burned on exposed areas. Her husband and 3 children were not. She found their bodies later that morning, burned beyond recognition, identifiable only by location and size. The raid lasted approximately 3 hours. 279 B-29s dropped their bomb loads on Tokyo. The firestorm consumed 16 square miles of the city, 100,000 acres. Approximately 87,000 people died that night. Another 90,000 were injured. Over 1 million lost their homes. The fires burned so hot, they created updrafts violent enough to flip bombers flying overhead. Pilots reported turbulence so severe, it damaged aircraft. The smell of burning flesh rose to 10,000 feet. Some crew members vomited from the odor. Others became numb, mechanically completing their bomb runs, while trying not to think about what was happening below. Captain McCarthy, flying one of the later waves, looked down at Tokyo and saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The entire city was glowing, not burning. Glowing, like looking at the inside of a furnace. Individual fires couldn't be distinguished anymore. It was just one continuous field of light, with smoke rising in a column that reached our altitude. I could see people in the streets, tiny figures running, trying to escape. Most of them didn't make it. The Tokyo attack killed more people than the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. 4 months later, it destroyed more area than the atomic bombing of Nagasaki. It was, by any measure, the single most destructive air raid in human history, and it was just the beginning. 64 cities. Over the following 4 months, LeMay's bombers systematically burned 64 of Japan's largest cities. The tactic was refined with each raid. Pathfinder aircraft would drop incendiaries to mark the target, creating visible aiming points for following bombers. Subsequent waves would drop concentrated loads of napalm incendiaries, creating firestorms that consumed entire urban districts. Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe all burned. Yokohama, Kawasaki, Tokyo again all burned. Cities that had existed for centuries were reduced to ash and rubble in single nights. Japan's industrial capacity was effectively destroyed. Its civilian population was demoralized beyond recovery. The firebombing campaign killed an estimated 300,000 to 500,000 civilians and left millions homeless. The effectiveness was undeniable. Japan's ability to manufacture military equipment collapsed. The planned invasion of Japan Operation Downfall. If this deep dive into the development and devastating impact of napalm in the Pacific War captivated you, subscribe to this channel for more untold stories from history's most controversial weapons and the battles that changed warfare forever. Leave a comment below. Did you know about napalm's role in World War II before watching this? What surprised you most about its development or use? Should weapons like this be completely banned, or do military circumstances sometimes justify their use? Your thoughts and engagement help shape future content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our next investigation into the weapons, tactics, and technologies that transformed modern combat from the laboratories, where they were created, to the battlefields, where they changed history. Share this video with history enthusiasts, military veterans, or anyone interested in understanding how scientific innovation intersects with warfare's darkest chapters. These stories deserve to be known, discussed, and remembered. And if you want to support deeper research and longer documentaries, exploring the complex ethical questions raised by weapons development, check out our membership options. Members get early access to content, extended interviews with historians and veterans, and behind-the-scenes research materials. Thank you for watching. The next time you encounter debates about modern weapons and their use in warfare, remember that these questions aren't new. We've been wrestling with them since a Harvard chemist mixed gasoline and aluminum salts on Valentine's Day, 1942. History doesn't repeat itself, but the moral questions it raises echo through every generation. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and never forget that technology without ethics is just power without wisdom. And remember, some fires burn forests, some fires burn cities, some fires burn in memory forever.